Welcome. I'm Jody Sockelauer, co-coordinator of the Teach Palestine Project at the Middle East Children's Alliance. I'm excited to introduce this morning's webinar, an introduction to the environmental impact of colonization from Palestine to the US-Mexico border zone. This webinar, co-sponsored by the Teach Palestine Project and the Xicanx Institute for Teaching and Organizing, is the first of a four-part series by teachers for teachers. Each workshop builds on the one before. By the end, we hope you'll have developed curriculum that's rooted in what's urgent for your students and that connects to the ongoing impact of settler colonialism in Palestine and here in the US. Of course, we hope that this workshop would be held right at the US-Mexico border, but we're making the best of the limitations imposed by the pandemic and instead including speakers from Palestine and participants from all over the US, Mexico, and beyond. Let's begin. Samia, you're up.
I'd like to quickly introduce the panelists we have today. I am Samia Showman, also with the Teach Palestine Project, an educator in the California Bay Area. Jody introduced herself. We have Anita Fernandez, Curtis Acosta, Amy Wan, Melissa Silva, and we're very lucky to have Jamad Jum'ah, who is going to be presenting via video all the way from Jerusalem, Palestine. Jamad is the coordinator of the Palestinian grassroots movement against the wall and the settlements. Now I am going to pass it to Curtis and Anita.
Hi everyone, bienvenidos, especially to our familia desde Mexico. Bienvenidos a ustedes. On behalf of XITO, I'm really honored to be here with you all and for us to be collaborating with Mecca and the Palestine Project. The XITO Collective is a grassroots urban education consulting group. We train teachers in decolonizing and rehumanizing pedagogy. And so Curtis and I wanted to start off with just a little bit of framing around the work we do and contextualize this a little bit in the education side of the curriculum building and why this is critical in this moment. And so XITO's decolonial framework is an attempt to identify those colonial structures that are embedded into our educational system and to dismantle those systems and rebuild from the bottom up. That's the work that we do in these structures that we are in education. And so our framework is decolonizing, and it's also what we call rehumanizing, centering the histories and voices of those that have been pushed out, erased, and omitted. And this framework also embeds Mexica indigenous epistemology, including several elements, but one of the concepts I wanted to touch on tonight or this afternoon is this concept of Pancheve. And Pancheve is seeking the root of the truth and can also be referred to as seeking the truth in the roots, which I feel is what we're doing not only today, but over the next several sessions that we'll be having with you all. And Pancheve is also a way to develop our conciencia, right, our critical consciousness. And by doing that, you know, for ourselves as educators, also providing the tools for our students to do that and building this curriculum, we really see Pancheve as part of that process, especially in this moment we're in, where we're seeing the teaching of true history, of climate change, of the intersections of border militarization and climate migration being replaced with, you know, very dehumanizing climate change denial alternatives. And I'm sure Curtis will talk more about the past of what we've seen with this elimination of, you know, the histories that we need to teach of our teaching our own culturas. And so this series is needed to ensure our teachers have access to build curriculum so youth understand the impacts of colonization on our world and specifically on the environment. And we are focusing in on two incredibly important fronts. And that is in Palestine and then here on the US-Mexico border. And so we're really excited to have these experts with us here to share their knowledge. And I'm going to pass it on to Curtis.
Gracias, hermana. It's great to be here with you all. It's always amazing to do this type of work as XITO and Mecca come together. And one of our other agreements or principles that we, as a collective, both in XITO and Mecca, and now our joint collective together, is to follow the Mayan principle and philosophy of Inlakesh. So loosely translated to "Tú eres mi otro yo," you are my other me. And as we have that kind of, that grounding, that framework in agreement amongst all of ourselves, it calls to us why we are doing this work together. Just like Anita was talking about, we are living in very, very tumultuous times. It's an ahistorical time. It's a time of anti-intellectualism, a time where we're running away from our own reflections and our own histories. And so this is an opportunity to expose that with love and with respect and with dignidad. And so, so what we ask you all to do is carry Inlakesh with you in the spirit of the wisdom, the Quetzalcoatl, the precious and beautiful knowledge that our experts are going to be sharing with us today, and to connect this to our lives as teachers, because we are living in an extraordinary year of 2020, where it's incredibly stressful to be a teacher, to be an educator, to be a human being. And we are, you know, we strip out down our institutional roles. We're all human. And so what does that mean? It means that right now we're living through a pandemic. We're living through violations of Inlakesh that is being done all over the globe, and especially here, not only in the rhetoric, but the actions of our own government. And we see this history of this, right? And way beyond the current moment, you know, it's touched us deeply as XITO, as my colegas and I are all deeply connected to the Mexican American Raza Studies program in Tucson that was eliminated and dismantled by you know, the same wave of white supremacy and the same wave of ahistorical, anti-intellectual, and dehumanizing actions that we see today with the 1776 Commission and the rooting out of critical race theorists and the demonizing of the 1619 Project. And so we're hoping today to understand why we're here a little bit better as educators in the sacredness of our role as maestras, maestros. I wish I knew how to do that with an X, so it could be more inclusive. But hopefully you understand and hear my heart. But today is an opportunity for us to learn, to get back grounded into Inlakesh, to get grounded into the ethnic studies movement that came forth, you know, over 50 years ago. Third World Liberation Front, the idea of third world studies, an idea of internationalism, and that this is a human project, an international project of humanity. And lastly, it's connected very closely to the resurgence of dignity and humanity that we see from our young people in the streets every day. And for us veteranos and veteranas and veteranex that have been around and trying to do this work for a long time, and specifically with we're in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, and also the land back movements of our indigenous brothers and sisters. Are really excited to hear from Amy in a little bit. So I'll kick it back to Anita so we can get the real experts on the stage and we can all learn together.
Gracias, hermano. So thrilled to introduce Amy Juan, who is here from the Tohono O'odham Hemarcan Rights Network, to provide for us a critically important perspective from the O'odham Nation, and very timely, as I'm sure she'll be sharing what's been happening not over, you know, centuries alone, but what is happening currently today. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amy.
It's good, Dash. It's good, Kodinik, everybody. Anya Chigig, Amy Wan, Chapkamaya Amjad, Chikshan, Donat the Nation. Nyaja Jenya Og of Jigig, Grimelda McGill, to Sylvester Wan. And you got Jenya Wask of Jigig, Mary Melissa Miles Butt, to Daniel One Butt. And you hold Jenya Bob of Jigig, Mary Elizabeth McGill Butt, to Lawrence McGill Butt. So just introducing myself. In O'odham, my name is Amy Wan, and I come from the O'odham Nation. My parents and my grandparents on both sides. And so I also come from the communities of Newfields and now introduce myself in that way. On my dad's side, Newfields is one of the last communities along the 75-mile stretch of the Donautim Nation that we share with the international border with Mexico and the US. And I grew up there. I'm 35 years old, and ever since my childhood have watched the increase in militarization and just the overall effects of these border issues on our community. And so that's led me to become an advocate of sorts for my community, to educate and to share what's happening and what is continuing to happen and what we're looking at into the future. And so I'll go into my presentation if they can bring that up. Okay, so I entitled the presentation today, Our Lands, Their Borders. And this picture here is of a gathering that we had back in January. To the right, just behind those trees is Arhuaipia or XITO Springs. And if you've been paying attention to the media right now, that area looks very different because they've reached that area with construction of the border wall. And so while we were down there, we held ceremony, brought people together from both sides of the border. So a lot of the folks that you see on the left side of the screen are our relatives that came from different communities in Mexico. And so it was a very beautiful and powerful, but also bittersweet gathering, just because, you know, when we're right up at the fence, we're reminded of the separation and the divide. And at that time, we're, you know, worried about what was going to happen several months from now, which, you know, is where we are today. And so I wanted to start with this photo because I want people to understand that while, you know, what you see on social media or in the news is very dire, please don't forget about the strength of the O'odham, of us and our people, and how we're moving forward with in this issue. So next slide, please. So if you're not familiar with the Donautim Nation, historically in the orange is our ancestral land. So spanning south to Hermosillo, Mexico, north to the Scottsdale, Phoenix area, east to the San Pedro River, east of Tucson, and west to the Sea of Cortez there. So that's ancestral O'odham land, and the area that you see in the red is the established Donautim Nation or reservation, as some people call it, as what it is now. So going from a big span of land to about 2.8 million acres, which is about the size of the state of Connecticut, is where we're located. And then the black markings are is the international line, 75 miles of international border that divides our land and our people in half, basically. So historically, you know, we've migrated as well back and forth across this line that was drawn. And over the years, as the border was established, we were able to still maintain what we call traditional crossings. And so there's several of them along the border there that O'odham have been able to cross freely. There were fences or gates, as you will, and this one right here is where I grew up. The community, the village of Newfields is not too far from here, about a mile away, if less than that. And this is one of our traditional crossings that in O'odham we called Korekijik, or the San Miguel Gate. And so a lot of times if you're reading up on O'odham and the border, you'll see this mentioned here. And what we have now is, you know, I want people to, let me just say, there's so much to cover. And with our time time limits here. I really tried to be intentional about sharing what I thought was important for people to understand. And so with this photo, what I want people to understand is that we're not only being I don't want to say oppressed, be suppressed as far as our movement across this line by the United States of America. We're also we're also under a lot of pressure from the Mexican government. And so what has happened in the past couple of years is that our traditional crossings have been closed. And this one here was the last one to be closed per se, but it was closed from the Mexican side. And what we're facing there is a lot of land grabs by Mexican ranchers who do have the political access and capacity to acquire land legally. And so for Autumn, you know, it's our ancestral lands. We've always been there, but we don't necessarily have the paperwork, I guess you would say. We've just always had a presence. But as things change and people continue to move, we've had things like this happen. And so we do have 9 traditional communities that still exist in Mexico, and we're accessible through this gate or this fence. So what usually took us about 20 minutes to get to these communities and these sacred sites and landscapes and even cemeteries on the other side of the line, now it takes us about 2 hours because we have to go through the closest port of entry, which could either be the Sasabe port of entry to the east or the Sonoita port of entry to the west. And this is a photo of the same area, actually. And so this is one of the impacts. So at that gate, it's always been a place for gathering for Autumn families on both sides of the line. And this is a photo that I got from my aunt of the times when people would gather there and exchange and trade and buy and sell food and different kinds of goods. And I grew up listening to my grandmother, you know, talk about how the best coffee that she got was from there. And then that's one of my grandfathers actually on the horse, my late grandfather, Alex. And so it's a reminder of you know, what not only the impacts on the land, but the impacts on our ways of connecting with each other and communicating and relating and trading and all of that good stuff. And so, you know, you could go there, you can get your bottle of pop, you could get a quesadilla, you can get tequila, cerveza, you know, different kinds of goods there. But with the closing of these traditional crossings, those things no longer happen. And so, you know, I want people to understand that this has changed our way of life. And I think that, you know, that's kind of hard to understand if you're not able to see it, or if you don't, if you don't really understand, you know, what our history has been along the border there. But, you know, I feel that it was important to share, to show, you know, how we lived everyday life. And so this is this photo, and again, that doesn't happen anymore, sadly. So this is the same community. This is a little bit further up into the mountains, into the Buenos Aires area. And so right on the other side of this mountain range is Sasabe. My family has a cemetery up there in the hills, and so we go there often. You know, when we're visiting our loved ones, or, you know, when we have to lay someone to rest, or even, you know, with my family who are ranchers, cowboys, they're always up there in the hills. But one of the things that we've seen, which really breaks my heart a lot of times, is these mountaintop surveillance sites. And so, you know, growing up on the nation, not being displaced and just being used to seeing, you know, the land and getting to know the land intimately, we noticed these changes. And so with the influx of Border Patrol out on the Donut Nation, we're starting to see a lot of these hilltop surveillance sites. And so, and they're very easy to spot out because, you know, you'll see a hill that all of a sudden will have a road leading up to the top. And some of the communities, I think for some of the communities who don't know their rights or who don't realize that they can say no, they allow it, or they don't know the ways to address it. But for other communities, they really put their foot down because a lot of times Border Patrol does not ask for permission when they do these things, even though they're supposed to, per agreements and resolutions with the Donut Nation. So I wanted to show these photos because this is a mountaintop surveillance site out in Buenos Aires, and when the community addressed it to Border Patrol, and I want to mention, I want to mention that there is a forward operating base not too far from this community. So, you know, this is a place where they have a heavy presence. And when the community addressed this with Border Patrol, you didn't ask for permission, you destroyed vegetation, all of that, you need to close that hilltop surveillance site. They did, and they promised that they would remediate the site, that they would restore the land to what it was. But if you live in the desert, you know that, you know, that's not so easy to do right away, because a lot of our vegetation takes a long time for it to grow itself. And so that's not gonna happen right away. But what Border Patrol did, which I thought was really ridiculous, was their idea of restoring the land was just to throw these dead trees and the dead acatillo and things like that onto the road and say, okay, we did it, we restored the land. And I wanted to document this because, you know, for a lot of us who deal with Border Patrol, we hear their promises, you know, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that, all of that, but we need to keep documenting, you know, what they really are doing, and they're not respectful of the land. So I'm really proud of my community, for my family, for standing up and for making them leave the site, and also for documenting this. This came from one of my cousins, these photos here, but that's one thing. So impacts on the land. Okay. So going further west, what we are seeing now is the erection of the border wall, and this is part of the wall that is going up in Organ Pipe National Monument Park, west of the Donut Nation. It is O'odham, or specifically O'odham, ancestral lands, but the O'odham have been displaced by the park itself, by the border itself, and by the Air Force that utilizes the lands as training grounds out near Ajo, which is one of the communities close to there. And so I think it's important for people to understand that yes, it's O'odham land, but it's O'odham. O'odham have different, I guess you would say, we call them sister tribes. So there's the O'odham, which is where we're located along the border. We're the most southern tribe, and then up to the north is the O'odham, which is Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and then in between that is the O'odham, or the Hill River Indian community, and then we also have O'odham, and then O'odham. O'odham, because of their history, especially of being forcibly displaced from their homelands, they have an interesting history, because they, even though they're O'odham and all of these sister tribes are recognized, the O'odham are considered a unrecognized tribe by the United States government. And so there's a lot of politics in there, but I want people to understand whose land this is occurring on and what's happening now. And this photo was taken back in January, and I thought it was a stark contrast. And if you've ever been near the border wall is just kind of a trip. It's really surreal when especially when you're standing at a place like this where the wall abruptly ends and you have a big, beautiful open space, and then all of a sudden a wall. And just how bizarre that is almost unbelievable, but you're standing right in front of it, and it's sometimes you can't believe that that's happening. Next slide, please. So this is Arahuaipia or Quito Springs, and this picture was taken in January. It is a sacred site. It is and it's not just sacred to all of them. I want to say it's sacred to all of life, especially in the desert. If you go into that area, it's so dry and hot, and then all of a sudden you come to this oasis and you understand, like, this is what an oasis is. And it's been a lifesaver, not just for wildlife, but also for people that have migrated and crossed those lands, and our people. And inside of this spring are endangered species that you can't find anywhere else, like the Sonoran pupfish and the Sonoran mud turtle, and snails the size of poppy seeds, very delicate life that are in danger. And if we go on to the next slide, please, we'll see what has happened within the last couple of months. So this photo was taken back in July. And so with the impact of not having much rain, and also the impact of the border wall construction, which has been utilizing a lot of groundwater for the cement that's being used to erect the border wall, it's had a really devastating impact on the spring here. And it's so heartbreaking, especially to know that there's not much that we can do to replenish the water as fast as is needed for these beings to survive. And so thankfully it's gotten a little water since then. It's not as dry, but it's still in danger. And when we bring up these concerns to Border Patrol and to the construction site for the border wall about the drilling, they blame it on a leak. And it's common sense. If this spring has survived for thousands of years with no problem, then all of a sudden you have this new activity and there's an impact. It's most definitely that. It's not a leak. It's a lot of other things. So I want to end with this photo, and this just coming back around to what the border wall has done as far as moving the communities, as far as bringing us back. And I do want to acknowledge that. I guess I don't want to say a good thing, but one thing that has come out of this issue and seeing what's happening down in Oregon Pipe, but also with the spring, is that it's brought the people back to the water. It's brought the people back to this land that not a lot of people have gone throughout the years, because again, it's been taken over by the park and by other entities. And so there have been a loss, a disconnect with this spring for some time. But the first photo to the left is relatives on both sides of the line, just sharing love, sharing strength. And then the photo on the right is a ceremony that just happened last weekend. Again, you can see a lot of our elders there. And so there's a lot of intention going into this. It's not just the protesting, it's also a lot of ceremony. There's also a lot of prayer and good intentions, and also saying all of this with the confidence that, we are the land. We've been here. We've always been here. We'll continue to be. We've existed before either government existed in name, and we'll continue to exist and care for our land and protect our land and our people, the health of our people, because we're connected in so many ways. And so that's the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions moving forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes a toda mi raza querida. Aquí estamos desde la frontera de Agua Prieta, Sonora. I would like to start by pausing for a moment and acknowledging that I'm currently presenting to you all on the land of the Chiricahua Apache people, We remember their connection to this region, and we give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. We pay respect to their elders and to all Chiricahua Apache people, past and present. My name is Melissa Silva, US born and raised binationally. It is truly an honor to be presenting to you live from La Frontera of Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico. You could actually see it right behind me here. Estamos directamente en La Frontera, right on the border. I could actually touch the steel fence. What you see behind me here is the steel fence, and it separates Agua Prieta from Douglas, Arizona. This steel fence that you see stretches 1,933 miles from the Pacific Ocean to the tip of South Texas. If you travel the border, you will find an assortment of fences with different shapes, sizes, and materials. Some areas don't even have no fencing at all. As many of you are aware, Trump declared a state of emergency in the early part of 2019. And then he tried to get Congress to approve the funding of a wall. And since he didn't get approval, he diverted it from other projects to fund his long-promised wall. We have to keep in mind that one of the main objectives of global imperialism is enhanced profitable extraction of resources. The building of Trump's wall is no exception. Overall, there's been $9.8 billion that have been secured to construct approximately 509 miles of the new border wall system. We make no mistake that this modern type of colonialism continues to leave massive geopolitical, social, psychological, human, and environmental trauma, but it also leaves scars. Gloria Ansaldúa describes that La Frontera functions as a marker of an open wound, the marker of a collective traumatic history. Trump's wall is a fresh wound on an already open scar. It's not an open wound, and it's not another wound. I mean, it's already open. It's an already open scar. But another fresh wound is the travel ban imposed during the pandemic. Our Mexican nationals are not allowed to cross the border, which has restricted mobility northbound. My grandmother, for example, has not been able to cross since March. We all have to cross to Agua Prieta every weekend to come and see her because she is not able to cross to the US to see her family, her grandkids, her daughter. Now, that travel ban has severely affected the economy in Douglas. I don't know how many of you know, but border towns, especially the one like Douglas, we depend a lot on the sales tax from Mexican nationals. Exactly 70% of sales tax comes from citizens of Mexico. Also, citizens and permanent residents are traveling more often than ever to Mexico to visit family. We have to actually be in Mexico in the line to travel into Mexico. And some of you might remember that the governor of Sonora during 4th of July weekend, she actually banned travel from US citizens and permanent residents into Mexico in order to alleviate some of the pandemic numbers that were escalating as a result of US citizens and permanent residents traveling into Mexico. So, but there's also another phenomenon of living on the border. And according to the Mexican consulate, over 30% of US citizens and permanent residents live in Mexico. Many of them cross the border every day to work in the US. Also in that category, we have our students. They live here in Agua Prieta, but they go to school in Douglas. A lot of those students are in our school district in Douglas. I have over half of my students at the University of Arizona here in Douglas commute every day from Agua Prieta to Douglas. But this is the issue, especially since the pandemic, and especially since Trump has been president. The attitude of border agents has worsened. There's more questionings at crossings. There is an aggressiveness worse than ever seen before. And I was joking with Curtis earlier because I was talking about the passive aggressiveness of border agents, but there's no passiveness anymore. Like Curtis said, we're beyond passiveness. It's very aggressive, and it's worse than we've ever seen before. We also continue to witness how this imperial powers have further degraded our environment, especially on federally protected lands, just like our hermana Amy so eloquently put it for all of us. One of them, of course, is the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, and many national wildlife refuges, such as our local San Pedro River. Earlier this year, 2 locals organized a peaceful protest called Hands Across the River that drew hundreds of area residents to demonstrate their opposition to Trump's border wall across the San Pedro River. Other amazing movements are the protection of the Quito Springs, such as just like our hermana Amy described, the Sky Island Alliance, which currently sets up a network. And this network is actually very interesting for us because this Sky Island Alliance has set up 60 remote cameras along the border. And with those cameras, they have been able to identify 71 species of wildlife that migrate. But just like my family has been cut off from each other, these species will also be cut off from each other, resulting in the local extinction of the species on either side. But here's a perspective that I would like to add as a person with deep roots in Mexico, and gracias a mi madre y abuela. Is this imperialistic approach passive aggressiveness by Border Patrol agents, or aggressiveness by Border Patrol agents, and Trump's border wall stopping the world to get into the US? Or is the US closing itself into the rest of the world? And here's a challenging notion that I would like to put out there as we prepare for the next 3 months of the impact of colonization, especially this modern version of it that we're seeing. Is globalization a new form of colonization? As educators, how can we help our students challenge the current assumptions of a globalized society so that they can understand their privileges and understand their position in the world as well? I can tell you that this challenging notion is already something that Mexico and the rest of the world is closely paying attention to. I want to thank XITO and the XITO and MECA team for including me in these life-changing workshops. Muchas gracias a todos. I hope that you can come and visit us in the Frontera soon. And a special shout out to all of my maestros del Tecnológico de México that connected to this workshop, and all of my maestros from all over the country in the US, and also my maestros from Mexico that have connected Chiapas, Mexico City, and Puerto Vallarta. Thank you all for joining us today. And I hope this was good for you guys to hear. This is our country. Este es nuestro México. Esta es nuestra this is our binational place that we live in, and it's not going to stop. It's only going to get worse than here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Melissa. I see we're getting some great questions. What I'd actually like to do is do our last couple of segments, and then we'll take all the questions together, because then we'll know exactly how much time we have. So our next speaker is Jamal Juma, who's going to be joining us from Palestine. Jamal is speaking to us from Jerusalem, and he's a longtime Palestinian activist and the coordinator of the Palestinian grassroots movement against the wall and settlements. He managed to get us a video this morning despite the lockdowns there. What he couldn't do was answer all our questions in the time frame we gave him. So we had to cut one section, which is about the environmental situation in Gaza, which is a really important section. But we'll send everybody who registered for this webinar Jamal's YouTube, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing. I just wanted to make one quick note before we start his video. Jamal uses settlement and colony interchangeably, and what he's referring to is the continuing theft of Palestinian land in the West Bank for Israeli development. And if you have questions about Jamal's talk, please put them in the chat also. And Jamal's not here, but I bet Sammy will be able to answer them for us. Thanks so much.
My name is Jamal Jum'a. I am the coordinator of the Palestinian grassroots movement against the wall and the settlements. I am Palestinian. I am from Jerusalem as well. In this short video, I'm going to talk about the Palestinian historic relation to land and the environmental impact of colonialism, how the environment has been used all the way as a weapon of ethnic cleansing to the Palestinian people within the context of settler colonialism. Palestinians in the 19th century, and let's talk about the end of the 19th century, they were depending mostly on agriculture. 2/3 of the Palestinian people were farmers. They were not just producing for themselves, but also Palestinians were exporting to different countries, either in the neighboring countries like Syria, like Egypt, Turkey, and also to Europe. For example, in 1913, 1914, the Palestinian export to these countries from citrus alone were about 1,553,086 books of fruits, of citrus. And almost the same quantity has been exported mainly to Egypt and Turkey, and part of the European countries from wheat, which is now almost we don't produce like any wheat. We imported it even during the British colonization. In 1917, it started the Palestinian catastrophe. After the First World War, when British colonized Palestine, and the Middle East, all Middle East has been divided between the colonial countries like France and Britain mainly. Palestine located under the British mandate, and right after, in 1917, Arthur Balfour, he was the foreign minister of England, he promised a Jews' homeland in Palestine. So here it started, from this point, the settler colonialism. Right after, the British mandate started to help and facilitating the immigration to Palestine, mostly from Jews from all over Europe, and this was under the agreement also of the French to Palestine. Where did they go with them? They were settling them on the Palestinian farmers' lands, next to the Palestinian villages and the Palestinian orchards. They started facilitating the companies' work, especially the one from European, that they have the Zionist origin, to start buying the land that time. They start mostly buying from landlord, and one of the major landlord that they bought that time land from, in Marj bin Amir, between Jenin and Haifa, was he was a Lebanese who was in Palestine investing here. And he left after that Palestine. And it's continued, like from 1917 until 1948, the Palestinian Nakba, almost 600,000 settlers has been brought to Palestine and settled in the Palestinian land. You know, this has been protected by the British. They start also facilitating their work. Mainly they focused also on agriculture. So they start in a way issuing the rules and the laws that will help them and encourage them investing, either financial or other services that they gave to them. In spite of that, the Palestinians continue like improving their cultivation. For example, in 1938, Palestinians exported 2.4 million boxes of citrus, mainly to Europe and mainly to the British. And this was a policy where the British has been directed even the Palestinian exports to their country. So so that means that the Palestinians continue rooted in their lands, continue their work as farmers, in spite that they start have now two enemies: the British occupation, which was dealt with the Palestinians like any other occupation, the oppression, the jails, the killing the people, and also the new settlers that they're taking over their land, where they had been trained, in fact, by the British military that time. In 1948, after the Second World War, when the British mandate decided to leave Palestine, in fact, they handed it to the Israeli Jewish military gangs that time. They were not a military, where they started ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from there, because they can't have a homeland or a Jewish state without ethnically cleansing the indigenous people. In 1948 until 1952, almost 2/3 of the Palestinian people in 1948 has been expelled from their land to the diaspora. Some 800,000 Palestinians has been expelled. What's left there in Palestine at that time is 150,000 versus 600,000 Jewish. At that time, they declare Israel. Almost most of the Palestinian villages and cities has been leveled to the ground. So this is to achieve the whole story of land without people to people without land. 531 villages has been leveled to the ground and destroyed, and then they started that time planting massively trees. They didn't plant massive trees on orchards. It's on the ruins of the villages to eliminate any ruins, eliminate any evidence that there was a village there. And mostly they brought a tree. It's not indigenous from this land. It's mainly grown widely in Europe. So this is one of the biggest uprooting of farmers and indigenous people from their land. But the connection to the land of these people has been continue living with them. If you go to the refugee camps, Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and the diaspora outside, they are still living the story of the land. The picture when they left that has been transferred to the children was until now still there. So if you ask any child in a refugee camp in Lebanon, he will describe to you even how many trees and how many dunams of land and how their house looks like, and he still hold the key in their hand. So here we can say that the land was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people and the minds of the people. So they continue that with them. The same story with the Palestinian refugees inside the West Bank that has been moved to the West Bank that time. That's after this catastrophe that the Palestinian has been was living and went through. It has been also changes in a way the Palestinian society, in a way that it had been destroyed, the Palestinian society structure. During the British, there was a Palestinian resistance. The Palestinians, from the first minute when their land has been colonized by the British, they stand up and start revoluting. In 1919, 2 years after the British occupation, we know what we called it the biggest Jaffa Revolution, where it was demonstrations and uprising were all around in Palestine. It's continue after that in different years. Then they start like militant or armed resistance. And in 1936, we witnessed one of the, let's say, the first experience of boycott, where almost 6 months continuously the Palestinians have striked, and they don't go to work. They didn't. They strike. It's a kind of a disobedience against the British and the British rules that time. Then after that, Palestine, in a way, from 1948 until 1967, were under the Jordanian ruling, and Gaza was under the Egyptian. In 1967, the Israelis invaded West Bank and Gaza, and became all historical Palestine became under colonization. So, likewise, what was happening in the 48, where the Palestinian land had been confiscated and new settlements has been built on the Palestinian lands, the same strategy has been continued in 1967. In the same year, 1960, at the end of 1967, the first settlement built in Jerusalem, after they destroy two major neighborhoods in the old city of Jerusalem, and they built on that neighborhood what we call it today, the Jewish neighborhood. In Jordan Valley in 1968, they started the first settlement there called Mechula in Jordan Valley. So it's significant. When we talk about Jerusalem and Jordan Valley, the first to be settled, we can connect it to the current situation of the annexation plan that I will talk about lately. So when you talk about building colonies, each colony built in the West Bank, it's on the expense of a Palestinian village. So it's replaced a Palestinian village and the Palestinian families. When the land has been taken for the settlements, that they use it either for cultivation or for any other use, this land is belonging to a Palestinian family that they were depending on in their life. So the first thing they did in 1967, in fact, is controlling the land and the water. The first law that they issue is the right of return for any Jew around the world to the new Israel, while denying the Palestinian right to go back to their land that they had been expelled maybe just weeks before this law. The second law that issued is the controlling of the water resources. Palestine in general, it has water, it has enough water. It has Jordan River, it has another small rivers, and it has big underground water in Jordan Valley and in the coastal area, near Gaza Strip as well. We have so many also natural springs that has been historically in Palestine. And if you go to the history of the villages even, the villages has been built mainly around this natural springs. Over 400 natural springs located in the West Bank. So when they start controlling the water, in fact, they start using the water against the Palestinian people existence. And this goes over the land, because if you want to cultivate your land, you need your water. When your water became controlled, it means that they limit your capacity of plantation. So that's where the Palestinian the agricultural production has been reduced in the GDP. And I will give an example. In 70s, it was 37% of the Palestinian GDP. It was from agriculture sector. Now it's almost around 2%. In 90s, it was 6.5%. So see how the Palestinian land has been taken from the people. In order to force the people to leave their land, in fact, they put other restrictions on the Palestinian production, either the markets, flooding Palestinian markets also with the Israeli products, using quantities of water that they can use for their cultivation. So this is reduced in a way the amount of the land cultivated. Feasibility of the cultivation for the Palestinian farmer became reduced. So it became, in a way, in many areas as well, it became unfeasible. So what did Israel create at the same time is open the labor market widely in Israel. So it started like a kind of a comparison, like you can't barely live from the agriculture while you are going to work in the Israeli labor work. You can earn much better money from using your land. So this is a policy that they started using to push like the Palestinian out of their land, to disconnect the Palestinians from their roots, from their connection to the land, and to become like connected to to the labor. But in spite of this, Palestinians also continue resisting these policies. I will bring you an example, for example, Jordan Valley. Jordan Valley, one of the first areas that targeted by the Israeli colonization. Now there is 37 colonies controlling Jordan Valley. There's 9,000 settlers living there versus today around 60,000 Palestinians, while before 67 there were 300,000. So all these numbers has been pushed out and ethnically cleansed and pushed out mainly to Jordan. So Jordan Valley has one of the major resources of water. It has Jordan River, and it has one of the biggest aquifers, if it is the biggest aquifer, underground water. 60% of the Palestinian water located in Jordan Valley. 90% of the Palestinian natural springs located also in the slopes and the mountains and the Jordan Valley itself. So for Israel, this is like a very rich economical area where they can use it. So it's like, it's not just political, it's mostly economical. So they start, like, as I said in the beginning, limiting the Palestinian access to water. The first big resource of water was Jordan River. Jordan River has been transferred from its source after Tiberias. It has been transferred to the Negev. So this is one of the biggest destruction for the ecosystem in the Jordan Valley. All the area between Jordan Valley and the Jordan River, around 5 to 7 kilometers wide, all along the Jordan River, it has been forbidden. It has been closed militarily in front of the Palestinians. So the Palestinians lost so much land. By the way, Jordan Valley is about 28.5% of West Bank. It is the biggest reserve of land. Even if the expansion for the future for the Palestinians, Jordan Valley was one of its main resources. So they started the policy into the more than one direction. First of all, reduce the Palestinian use of the land in Jordan Valley, the planted areas, by putting the restrictions, as I talk about, in the water and mainly using the water and the restrictions in the markets as well. The second thing is targeting the Bedouin communities in that area. We have in the north of the Jordan Valley around 36 Bedouin communities in the north of the Jordan Valley. We have 46 communities in the middle, and in the middle area of the Jordan Valley, and we have such a number in the south of the Jordan Valley. Mainly all the animal husbandry and the animal production for the Palestinians, 90% of it had come from that area. And these Bedouin communities are controlling wide areas. They were using their land, the wide areas, for grazing. This is the land that's not cultivated by the farmers. So from the beginning, Israel started classifying Jordan Valley. So they put around 46% of the Jordan Valley classified as a military zone, where they built 6 military bases in the Jordan Valley. Like 11%, they consider it as a military training, like shooting area. And around 20% of the Jordan Valley has been classified as a natural reserves. But if you look at this classification and you see the reality there, you don't see any reason for seizing all this land. Because you have 46 Jordan Valley for military areas. There is no military cover that area. So the reason for that is just to have a law to cover themselves, that they can prohibit the Palestinians from using that area, and or even for the farmers and the Bedouins to grazing their animals in that areas, because it was grazing areas for the animals. Natural reserves. When we talk about natural reserve, you expect that you are talking about protecting the nature, the variety of kind of wild things that grown up there, the wild animals there. But in fact, that's not happened, because almost every summer they set fire in this areas. So when you set fire in the natural reserves, not anymore natural reserve. Why they set fires? Because this is the grazing areas for the Bedouins. So the Bedouins became very surrounded and very blocked in very small areas that they can use their land. This is not the only way that it has been used to push the people out. In fact, if you look at how they start in 70s, they start chasing, after these laws, they start chasing the farmers and the Bedouins from the shepherds from there by making them paying high fines, like for each animal that they caught at their grazing in that area. It's about 5 GDs that time. It's like a big amount of money. It has been developed lately to 11 GDs. But they were used even helicopters and military jeeps to chase the cattle and shooting them in a way that to terrify the people and to make them leave that area. Of course, this didn't work really properly, and it didn't achieve the goals. From that, the people stay in their land and the Bedouins stay in their land as well. So they start using the environment, the main resources of the living for the people, the basic right for any human being to live in, guaranteed by all laws in the world, which is the water. So first of all, after they dried Jordan River, they didn't allow the Palestinians to have any networks or connected to any networks of water pipes. In the Jordan Valley also, what we know them is like an historical collective wells, and this is, some of them goes back to thousands of years from the Roman period, and this is huge collective wells that people collect their water and to use it. And this is not anymore. 200 of these wells has been totally destroyed by the Israelis. The Palestinians used to use also dams. After the flow from the mountains, there's an area that became the water settled there, which is they called it the dams, small dams, natural dams. It used to be enough for their use for until almost the end of the summer. This has been polluted by the settlements' sewage when they flee the sewage water into this area, so it has been contaminated, so people can't use it. So what's only left for the Bedouins is to use the water tankers, which is, I think it's one of the most costly water in the world. Each 1 cubic meter of water, it costs them around $10, which is something beyond the capacity of the farmers. But in spite of that, they stay in their land there. This is other than this other services, the health, for example. None of any of these communities is allowed to have a health clinic, even in a tent. You can't build any structure there, animal shelter. You need a license from the what's so-called the civil administration, which is the military administration. So this has been, the restrictions goes over since 1967, over now to 52 years, that's going on, and harassment and punishment that has been used against the people to push them out from that area. To be honest, it has been worked little bit, like so many families has been left for that area because of this, of what the Israelis do against them, the harassment and the threat of their life and the drying out their resources. They can't live anymore there, say they moved. But still the community is still there. There's still people is living there. There's no community that has been left totally the place there. And this is one of the things that we can appreciate with these people power of resistance and steadfastness in spite of all this very unbelievable restrictions and harassment that they put on them. This is not the only thing that they are doing, but if you look at the natural springs, we talk about 400 natural springs in the West Bank. 76 of them has been taken over by the settlers. So this is another resource that the Palestinians can't access easily. Continue building the settlements on the confiscated land, and on land that they consider it like military areas, where they started giving it to the Israeli authorities to build a new settlements in that areas, reducing the Palestinian agriculture land and the possibility for the Palestinian future in this in their land and their country. The other dangerous thing that they were using when you talk about destruction of environment is the dumping sites. We talk about 98 dumping sites, most of it's chemical, from the Israeli factories, either from inside Israel or from the industrial zones in the West Bank that they created. 98 of these dumping sites located in different areas of the Palestinian land, from Hebron to Tul Kerem to Bethlehem to Nablus. So we know what kind of toxics that they're burying in this dumping site from how it's reflected on the health of the people. So the highest, for example, cancer cases in the West Bank are from Hebron first and from Tul Kerem. And that's because Hebron is very close to the south borders, where the nuclear reactors in the south, in the Negev, and the dumping, the nuclear waste has been dumped in the mountains of the West Bank there, while the solid waste from the Israeli factories, either in 14 industrial zones that they're creating all over the West Bank next to the settlements, it has been dumped also in the Palestinian areas and dumping sites which is close to the cities and villages. It's not just like any the affecting the people health directly from what's radiation or from even grazing the animals in that areas, but also it's contaminated and to the underground water for the people. They try in a way or another, like by all this is to eliminate these people. If you look at the Palestinian case comparing to the other cases around the world, it's not a unique. We have similarities in what happened to the Native Americans, to the New Zealand, Australia, in Latin America, and many other indigenous people that has been targeted to be genocide and to be eliminated from the earth. Another similarity that we have in Palestine also is the apartheid system, particularly in South Africa. So it's a combination of these that has been used against the Palestinian people to get rid of their cause and to make them defeat them, and to make them accept the reality that Palestine is not Palestine anymore, it's Israel, and Palestinian people are nobody. The Palestinians never gave up. As I said, since the British colonization, they continue resistance, in spite of all disasters and catastrophes that we are passing through. Still, until now, the Palestinians still resist. And if there is anything you can relate it to, it is to their connection to the land, to their environment. The land are very well and deeply rooted in our culture, in our narratives, in our poems, in our meals, in every single aspect of our life. When you talk about olive tree as a holy tree in Palestine, it is holy because it's a symbol of resistance. This seed can live for thousands of years. This tree can live in the worst conditions of natural conditions. And for centuries, it has been provide the Palestinians their source of living. We have sayings in our language: if you have olive oil, you will not starve. So we are waiting for the seasons to improve our life. We are waiting for the sun to rise up, and before they rise up, we receive it when we are working on our land. When we are kids, when we go to the land, my father was telling the story of my ancestors through that tree. Your father sat there, your grandfather moved the stone from here to there, here what we were doing, what we are planting, and he will tell you the age of this tree, and you can connect it with your roots in the country. So our connection to our roots is one of the main inspirations of our resistance. Our connection to the land make our spirit feels strongly the human rights. What we go through, as I said, is not a unique, and make us feel the suffering of the other people around the world. That's why Palestine caused its internationality. Because from the beginning, we were in solidarity with other peoples who are struggling for their rights, for their freedom, against racism. We were helping them practically. We were in solidarity with them. We connect our resistance to the other people. We identified our cause with the indigenous, the indigenous in the United States, in Latin America, in Canada. We identified and in strong solidarity with the American, the Black Americans' struggle for their rights and against the racism and racial discrimination. And at the end, we are people of right. No matter how it looks that we are weak, but we are not weak. We are strong with our resistance, or our strong connection to our land and insistence that we will continue and we will gain back our rights and our land. And thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. So we thought this would be a good time to do some of these questions. So the first few questions were for Amy. How has the border impacted relationships within the Otham people on both sides? And also, how have these new restrictions impacted spirituality and spiritual practices?
Well, since its establishment, it's impacted us in many ways throughout time, but specifically, what I would say is it has literally caused a divide between the people, between families, between ceremony and different things like that. But I think most of all, the impact is felt through the different social ills. So for example, Autumn in the so-called US, we have a lot more resources, right? As far as education, as far as resources, even just like running water and electricity. But right on the other side of the line, in those 9 communities that I was talking about, many of them don't have running water, electricity, access to healthcare, and access to education. And so a lot of times, some of those families who wanted to access the resources here in the US, they would have to cross every day. But for a lot of the families, especially who have a long history in those communities, they've chosen to stay permanently and occupy those communities, because once, Autumn begin to leave those communities, they're considered up for grabs, and we've seen how that happened throughout history and just up until very recently. But I would say that we are working really hard to maintain our connections, and there are still several ceremonies and things that happen. I can speak to 2. One is we have a run every spring that connects all of the Autumn tribes that I was talking about earlier, and we always either start or end in the communities in Mexico. And that maintains our connection to a lot of the sacred sites that are there. And we've been, directed by our elders to continue that movement across the border no matter what. And so There's a lot I could share about that, but I would say, you know, that especially for traditional people, we don't ask for permission to cross the border. There's still some areas where we can freely cross. That's changing. And so we have yet to see what those impacts are going to be like really recently or in the future. And so that's the best I can answer there.
Okay. So this next question is like a whole course, but could you
Yeah.
explain why some nation tribes are not federally recognized and why others are?
Right. I was thinking about how I was going to answer that without, you know, yeah, it being a whole class but it does bring up a good point, you know, that very little people know about the history of indigenous peoples, Native Americans here in the United States and the whole history behind that. But I do want to say that prior to these settler colonial governments and ways of governing ourselves, we had our own traditional forms of government. But with the onslaught of settler colonialism, we, oh my gosh, going through a phase in history where, you know, we're being moved around from land to land, being displaced from our homelands, and our culture and just ways of living our lives were changed a whole lot. And there's just a lot of traumatizing history there for a lot of different tribes. But what it came down to specifically for being recognized as or being labeled as a federally recognized tribe is the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. So what that basically did was kind of in a way to force tribes to adopt a constitution modeled after the US Constitution in order to become federally recognized, to show that we were organized governments according to the US government. And so there's some tribes who didn't go through that process. There's some tribes who chose not to. And then there are those that did. And so a lot of tribes now that exist or that continue to exist utilizing this form of governance is based off of that act and just the fact that they chose to adopt the Constitution and organize ourselves in that way.
Great.
Yeah.
And one more question for you. What do you think the role of predominantly white environmental organizations like Sierra Club, who focus on conservation, has been in stopping or relating to the construction of the border wall?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that I would say is to amplify Indigenous, Native, Autumn voices, because, you know, organizations like the Sierra Club and people who are a part of those organizations have access to places that we don't. So the best that you can do is to support us, not come in with your own agenda as far as how you're going to solve our issues or our problems, but to actually respect the voices of the people whose land that you're on, because we know the land intimately and we do have a vision. You know, we do have our own thoughts and knowledge as far as how to move forward with these different issues. And so I would say that amplify Indigenous people's voices, and in that way also share your resources. I've seen very recently some organizations here in our local community that have done the work to hire Indigenous people and put them in positions of leadership and give them the resources to use these organizations and their resources to actually work against these issues, because you have to understand that a lot of times in our communities we're struggling already, you know, in our own families, to put food on the table, to take care of our communities. And so when we take on these battles or these issues, that's like a whole nother job. So if we're able to have the support and the capacity to actually do this work as work and get paid for it, it just makes it a whole lot easier, and just amplifies, what we're capable of. Because a lot of times it's even hard to get a place at the seat, a seat at the table of, where these conversations are happening. So with the big organization like the Sierra Club, put us at the table, take a step back and support us in that way. And I think that there's a lot of different, there's a lot of good things that can come out of that. And I just want to end there by saying that, what I've seen has been really important, especially during the pandemic, is realizing how important it is to build relationships, and not just to simply have, solidarity, or to educate yourself, but to really build relationships that are trustworthy, that progress, that we actually see some movement, and we're able to move together. And that's so important. Trust is a big part of that. So
Great.
thank you. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you so much. I think at this point we'll move to Samia, who is gonna start tying everything together, but also if you wanted to, there's been a whole conversation about some issues around nutrition from Jamal's talk. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that out.
Yeah, I saw that question. I mean, I feel like even with the lack of water shortages, that's where kind of the traditional Palestinian culture comes into play, right? What you can't find in one village, you'll get from another, because we continue to really want to live off the land. Although when you go into some of the cities, right, it is one way, if you can't access fresh fruits and vegetables and those kinds of things, that Israel forces you to buy their products from their stores. But I think that can be a whole other topic. I know I didn't probably address that super sufficiently, but if we can get the slide deck up, then I can start with those. Trying to synthesize there, and then I know, Curtis and Anita can jump in. But what I wanted to start with and remind us is that we want to really use this idea of settler colonial framework as our anchor around teaching and learning about these issues. I shouldn't be, but I continue to be stunned by the parallels between what's happening around us in Arizona and the US and Mexico and Palestine, and the things that Amy and Melissa shared, whether it was around the militarization of communities and losing land for them to create, these borders and these walls, and, what you see and hear about today from our various panelists, whether it's Odom or Douglas or Gaza or the Jordan Valley, it's not an accident, right? It's the extension of colonial projects that began over 100 or more years ago. These colonial projects were specifically engineered and implementing, knowing the desired outcomes and who would pay the social, emotional, psychological, and physical toll for lifetimes and generations to come. We are now, the products of that. As areas were colonized and taken by force, whether here or in Palestine, and people were expelled never to return, our histories and trajectories were being altered and continue to be today. My husband's family was expelled in 1948 from the village of Beisan, which is now Beit Chan. And his parents, started their family in the camps of Jordan. They bore and raised 10 kids, all who have UNRWA refugee status. And my husband Faraz first stepped into Palestine just 12 years ago after becoming an American citizen. And as a visitor, the same way my own mother, who actually was born, raised, married, and bore her first child in Jerusalem, is also a visitor with no legal status in Palestine anymore. So I think that, these parallels are a lot of what we're seeing today. Some of what was talked about, with families separated across borders. I think about many of my students who are newcomers coming in from Guatemala, separated from their families in Central America, and kind of the inhuman practices and policies we have around separating families, and the fact that now they are here kind of mostly alone, right? As teenage, kids trying to find their way. Next slide. So you're kind of looking through some of these slides and visuals, and I know I didn't, specifically go through them. I'm sure we can provide these, the slide deck, but I just want to leave you to kind of reflect on a few things besides what Amy and Melissa and Jamal shared in their presentations, which is, what is Palestine and what is left of it when you think about the geography and what's physically happening there, right? You can see the green swaths of land that are considered Palestinian, and all of the red in between where settlements were created, and where a contiguous kind of wall is snaking through and separating people from one another. What is the United States? What does it mean to be American? And, as a geographic area, maybe it's very hard, to define. But as a people, right, as Palestinian people, and I think the same thing for, the people here that are fighting against, land theft, water theft, the creation of the wall. We are steadfast, right? We are resilient. We are strong. Jamal talked about all those. And, as the powers at B try to continue to sweep up swaths of land, we definitely as people are not going to be swept up with it, right? And I feel like that same spirit is embodied here in the US, in Arizona and Mexico as we continue to fight for our humanity and justice, which is so intertwined within our communities. So I'll stop there and let, Curtis or Anita add what they'd like on this.
Well, thank you, Samia. And just thank you, Amy, Jamal, Melissa, Jody for your questions, and for reiterating the questions from our friends and colleagues. I think, at this point, I would just like to make some connections as far as, what it means to be a teacher of color in the United States and not knowing our own histories and how damaging that can be. And so maybe, as well as our colegas down in Mexico, and possibly, going through a similar rewriting of their own history and the indigenous histories of Mexico. So I just, one of the principles that we hold on to at, XITO, that we learned from our Mexica and, ancestors and our elders here, is that the idea of Tezcatlipoca, the idea of self-reflection. And so, as we build towards, our webinar, from a webinar to our workshops where we're going to start working together as teachers, I think, tonight is a great opportunity for us to look into the smoking mirror of Tezcatlipoca, and for us to think about, how much we don't know, have some humility about that. And I think that's a powerful tool in our country right now, is to be humble. Because there's so many people that seem to know so much, but they don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from. When you think about the nativists right now, in the nativist rhetoric in this country, in the United States right now, the building of the wall, we saw those damaging pictures from what's happening to autumn land and to our environment, to our beautiful deserts. When you think about these projects that are being done all the way up to the north in the Dakotas and for the Lakota people, this is nothing new. This is a continual project, and when we hear nativist rhetoric right now about build the wall, keep people out, we have to think about the historical reality, which is, most of the folks that are saying this are just a couple of generations, maybe more, from Europe, and they may not know themselves. And so what does it mean for us as teachers of color who need to know our own histories, but also need to know the histories of others, so that we don't get compartmentalized and reduced into not seeing our other, to go back to Inlakesh, our other me. And as well as, folks of European descent to have that cultural humility to understand that there's a long way for us to go together to unlearn so we can learn together in a way that mirrors Inlakesh. And so as we build towards like looking specifically at environmental impacts and how we can build curriculum from this point forward, I think as a community of learners right now, we just need to, take some time. This was tons of information that is very, very powerful, very emotional, and in a time when our emotions are running high for a myriad of reasons, including the pandemic, including the election. And for us to know, like you said, Samia, that we are survivors, we're resilient people, but we need to do this together. And I think that's one way that we've been, unfortunately, for years and years, I think folks of color have been used against one another, and to fight for scraps and to not really look at the machine, to look at the system itself and what it does to our common humanity. And we need to flip that and start learning about ourselves and look and reflect from this point forward, so that we can come to our next space together, in a good way, with our open hearts and being able to ask questions. And I really appreciate everyone asking these really vulnerable questions too, that are, a lot of people, usually we front sometimes that we're experts when we're not. I'm still learning in this, so much about myself and about these common connections, because this is a common project that's done against all of us, and it will continue to harm our children and harm our elders if we don't start thinking more relationally. And I think Amy said that too, that it's a challenge for us to be in relation to one another rather than solidarity that's built from that relation. And so I think I'll stop there. But just challenge everybody to practice some good, healthy self-reflection, look into that smoking mirror if that's Kalipoka, and figure out, who you are, where you're at, both as an educator, as a human being, and what it means to hear these stories and what it means for us to try to disrupt this project in a good way. I don't know if Anita has anything else, or if we're going to move forward to more Q&A.
Thank you, Curtis and Samia, so much, and all of our speakers. I think you all summed it up beautifully. I think the only thing that I would add, that's already been said, is, in this moment, as we are embarking on this work together, and those of us who are going to continue on with this project of building curriculum, I'm hearing Amy's words really resonate, that reminder about amplifying Indigenous, Native, and in our case here, Odam voices, and sharing our resources, and also always in this work that we're engaging in, always thinking about listening to the voices of those most impacted by the issues that we're focusing on, and using those voices to then help us in this project of building this curriculum. And that is that true solidarity. That's part of mobilizing, that's part of building power, and raising awareness. And one way to do that is through building curriculum to teach our youth about this colonial project that, as Jamal spoke about, the project of eliminating people, that are connected to a certain land. And so pushing back against that through education and through curriculum building. So I'm really appreciative of all the speakers. I want to watch this again to try and capture more, and just really honored to be working with all the folks here, and thank you everyone who is attending too. And so I think Jody's gonna wrap us up.
I'm gonna wrap us up. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. And if you signed up for the next session, we'll send you more information and some suggested readings soon. And next time we're really going to start, this has been a huge amount of information. Next time we're really going to start focusing on what does this mean in the classroom. So we'll be modeling lessons and working together, and it'll be workshop format. So we'll be in small groups. It won't be just, everybody will be able to participate. So I'm really looking forward to that. If you aren't signed up for the next 3 sessions, but you would like to attend, I think that Anita's going to put the email to send us an email, and we'll put you on the waiting list. We want to keep the group small enough so that we can really collaborate, but we'll figure out how everybody who wants to can be part of this. So I want to thank all of our speakers, and especially Kai DeVolt from XITO and Rochelle Watson from Friends of Sabile North America, who ran the back end. You're both the best. Thank you all so much. Have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay strong.